Hello, everyone. Well, we've finished Jeremiah chapter 1, haven't we? So far, so good. You know that I like to practice three-column Bible study when I read every morning. That means I read the text, and then in one column I write it out word for word. In an adjacent column I write it out in my own words. And then in the third column I write out a prayer that is based upon some thought from that text. You know, I really feel that writing this text out word for word and then writing it in my own words clarifies the understanding of the text. When I write it the second time in my own words, I understand the text better and I often have new insights. And so I highly recommend this three-column Bible study. But of course, you probably have noticed already that our readings in Jeremiah are much longer than they were in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. And that means you may not have the time to write out the text word for word and then write it out in your own words. You may only have the time to read the text, to meditate upon it, and to write out a prayer for the day based on that text. I do hope you're able to write out a prayer, because application of the text to our own lives for the next 24 hours is very important, I believe. So, I hope you can follow three-column Bible study in our study of Jeremiah, but if you can't, I'm just so glad you have the time to read the text with us. Well, let's talk about chapter 1. What was it that impressed you from chapter 1? Were you impressed as I was by Jeremiah's consciousness of a divine call? Jeremiah was absolutely positive that God had called him to a very special purpose, which he talks about in verses 9 and 10. But I like the fact that Jeremiah realizes that before he was formed in the womb, God knew him, and that before he was born, God consecrated him. Consider this. If ever Jeremiah in later days was overtaken by despair, he could know that the divine purpose for him reached back even before his birth. Now, I would like to think that God has such a purpose for me, and that God had a purpose in mind for me even before I was born. I don't know that this text gives me the right to conclude that, because just because Jeremiah had that call before he was born doesn't mean that I have such a call. But I do feel a sense of call, don't you? I do feel that God has called me to live a certain way, and that God has a special purpose in mind for me. I'd like to believe that, and I'll tell you what, having a consciousness of a call gives a person great motivation for serving the Lord, don't you think? So I was impressed with Jeremiah's consciousness of a call. And then Jeremiah starts to give his excuses why he can't do it. I don't know how to speak, and I'm only a boy, he says in verse 6, and that sounds a whole lot like Moses, doesn't it? And the excuses that he offered to God for not wanting to go back to Egypt and be God's spokesman. But God assures Jeremiah that he will be with him and that he will enable him to accomplish whatever God wants him to do. Human inadequacy and inexperience provide the occasion for divine enablement. You're not too young, you're not too inexperienced, you're not too inadequate to do what God has called you to do. And I love verse 9. God says, "Now I have put my words in your mouth." Lord, put your words in my mouth. That would be my prayer too. And then in the last part of the chapter, Jeremiah sees two visions which, well, they hint at a massive invasion of Judah from the north. He sees this boiling pot that's tilted toward the south, and the contents are flowing down over Judah. God wants Jeremiah to boldly declare his judgment on Judah. And look at verse 17. I was impressed with that. "But you, gird up your loins, pull up your robe, and cinch your belt around your robe so that you have freedom of movement. Gird up your loins, stand up, and tell them everything that I command you. Do not break down before them, or I will break you before them." Wow. Brace yourself, Jeremiah. Speak my words. Don't be discouraged. If Jeremiah draws back in fear and runs from his mission, he will encounter not only people as adversaries, but God himself. Whoa! A person who fears people has also God to fear. That's a strong charge, isn't it, to those who would stand and speak for God. And then let me give you just a very brief preview of chapter 2. In this chapter, Judah is indicted for her sins. The chapter seems to be dominated by the prophet's charge of flagrant, inexcusable, and incomprehensible apostasy. Judah has broken covenant with God. She has fallen away from her relationship with God. And the whole chapter is a powerful indictment of the nation's rebellion. And the images and the metaphors that Jeremiah uses are poignant and keen. I want you to enjoy this chapter. Well, enjoy is probably not the best word, because Jeremiah is going to say some things that really indict the nation of Judah. But for sure, let's apply what we read in this passage to our own lives. And I'll see you in a few days in another video, and we'll talk about what we saw in chapter 2 and get a preview of chapter 3. And thank you for reading this great book with me. God bless you.